It would help if I unmuted myself. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm sorry I'm running a little bit late today. I was just on a call with one of our good friends of the channel, Dee, who's actually hopefully going to join me today to talk about the geofencing stuff in a little bit more detail. So we're going to get some ideas from her around her thoughts on the geofencing. You know, if you watch this channel, that I love talking about digital forensics, which is not my area of expertise, but I think is so important when it comes to the Delphi case. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to look back over a video that I did a few months ago that was about Holeman's deposition. And I listened to this again today while I was doing some gardening, and I was like, I didn't even remember half the things I'd said in the video. So rather than make a new video saying all the same stuff again, probably with less insight now because it's been a while since I researched it, I was like, let's just replay parts of it. So I'm going to replay the video, and you guys are totally welcome to ask questions. We can pause it and chat along the way. And when Dee arrives, we'll pause it and we'll get her on and have a chat with her too. And yeah, just make it a bit interactive today. So yesterday's live ended with me still plugging geofencing. I think that is the key to exoneration for Richard Allen. I believe still that in the early stages of the investigation, his phone was checked, not using geofencing, because that wouldn't have been available in the early days in 2017. But I think that maybe something like Nilo's or Tower Dumps information was used to help see that Rick was not a person of interest in this case. Now, any of that information may now be obscured. I hope not. But even if it is, there'd still be a paper trail. There'd still be some breadcrumbs in the databases and systems that are used by law enforcement. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday, and how the defense or the legal team for Richard Allen could request some more of that back end stuff. But aside from that, we also talked about geofencing that we know is actually present in discovery that could potentially still be used to indicate exactly what I think law enforcement knew about Rick back in 2017, and that is that he was not at the scene of the crime, that he left the trails before the girls were abducted and, of course, untimely murdered. So without further ado, let's go back to hearing what we had to say about Holeman a few months ago. It would have been around October, because I'm talking about Halloween. So it's a couple of months ago. Some of you may have already seen it. Apologies if you have. Like I said, I actually listened back to my video today when I was gardening, and there were so many things I couldn't remember. So I think even if you've seen it before, you might still be interested, I hope. So let me know if you want to pause. Let me know if there's any questions. And hello to everybody. I love seeing all of the familiar faces. I actually really like streaming at this time, because the chat at this time is a lot of the people who I really vibe well with. So love to see you guys, and I'll join you in the chat in just a tick. In being involved today. I'm just going to skip ahead a bit, guys, in this video, because I was having technical issues that day. So give me a sec and I'll try and get to the right point. Yes, I'm back on my computer. Something I never thought I would. Investigators, is it really? So, as always, really anchoring ourselves on these two beautiful girls and continuing to seek justice for them, and of course for Rick. The disclaimer, as always, as well, that this is just my thoughts and my ideas, and sometimes AI's assisted ideas. I'm not an expert in digital forensics. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal professional. I'm not an investigator. I am just somebody who gets super interested and hyper focuses on things. So yeah, don't take this as any expert opinion, and also don't quote me on anything here. But yeah, hopefully we get some conversations going around this stuff. So this is the part of the deposition that I'm going to focus on. If you guys want to see the deposition in full, I've seen the link being shared on X, and this is the only reason I'm going on X now is just to get information. I'm not communicating on X because, yeah, I don't think it's a very safe space, but still a good source of downloads and information. So All Eyes on Delphi, I believe, is the one who has uploaded this. But it's also been talked about in various creators' videos as well. Okay, so let's read through just these few lines. So I believe this is Rosie asking the questions here, and he says, let's talk about geoforensics. Okay, now we're getting outside my realm of expertise. And Holeman says, me too. Tell me, do you know what that means generally? He says, I know, you're talking about putting up geofences. Yeah, generally, yes. Okay, was gathering that information in this case, was it helpful to your investigation? Yes. Okay, did any of the information that you gathered from this geofencing, from these efforts, connect Richard Allen with these crimes? And Holeman says, yes, Sharon, I'm sorry. I did put photos on the screen and you may not want to see them. And here I am worrying about putting myself on the screen. No offense at all. It's just it's not about how he appears. It's about the fact that his actions are pretty awful. And so we get this connection between a person and their actions, and it becomes, yeah, the vibe isn't good. He was in the geofence, but more than likely his phone was at his residence, it appears. So again, he was in the geofence, but more than likely his phone was at his residence, it appears. We're going to get to this a little bit more soon. He said he was using his phone, but we have no evidence that that occurred. Rosie, you also don't have the phone that he was using, right? Correct. What you're saying is that with the geofence itself, you were able to detect the existence of his phone. And Holeman says it was after later on in the evening. I don't know the time. I don't want to give you inaccurate information, really. Okay, guys, D is in. So let's add D to the stage and then we'll continue to watch together. Hey, D.
Hey, fancy meeting you here.
Long time no speak.
Hello, everybody.
So everyone will know Dee's one of our lovely moderators here, good friend of mine. We were just having a long chin wag about the case, hence why we started a little bit later. And Dee, you've got some thoughts on the geofencing stuff?
Yes, I think geofencing data that we would get now isn't going to look anything like it would have in 2017. There may not have even been anything available in geofencing. And there was always the potential that because it was so new, they may not have even asked for it until it was too late. But we know they had something. I just don't think that there was going to be much on there. The reason it wasn't offered in court was because there wasn't much there.
Yeah, so
my opinion.
Yeah, I think I don't like, so initially I used to think that maybe that's what they had in 2017 to clear Rick, but I don't think that anymore, because you're right, it was really new then. It wasn't being routinely used. I think, as far as I'm aware, in the hearings, they talk about a 2019 subpoena for the geofencing information, or a Google subpoena. So I think they got the data in 2019, but I've also recently heard, and I don't know if this was in the appellate brief or where I saw it, but they were talking about 2022 geofencing as well, which was a re-request around some of Rick's accounts. Now, that I agree would possibly not have a lot because it was over 5 years. And my understanding is, they don't keep it for that long, do they?
No.
Yeah.
I think 3 to 5 Usually more closer to 5 for Google.
Mm,
Apple
mm,
might be different, but
mm.
still 3 to 5 it's not a very long time.
No.
And
Now,
if
I
you have
think
your
that, yeah.
location services turned on, they'll keep it longer.
Mm.
But if I didn't have mine turned on back then, I don't have it turned on now because I don't
Mm.
go that far from home.
Yeah, so I think so. The little bit of research I did was I think back in 2017, it was a default sort of setting on smartphones to have the location services on, but I don't know that because I know a lot of the time, when you set up a new phone or whatever, it asks for your permission, doesn't it? So yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know. It's hard to remember back to what it used to be like, but that would possibly, yeah, that could possibly compromise just how much information there is too.
and they were so rural. Like, even if there had been 10 people on the bridge,
Mm.
none of them may have shown up in the data in 2017. Possibly not even now. That there weren't enough towers. It wasn't dense enough. There were
Yeah.
trees. There just there were so many factors that would have made it difficult to pick up
Yeah.
much of anything.
So my understanding was, I think, and I could be wrong here as well, because as I always say, I'm definitely not a digital forensic expert, but I think with Google, I think they call it SensorVault or something, and they talk about it uses GPS, and now I've forgotten what else it uses. I can't remember, but I guess because we know Libby's GPS coordinates are actually pretty good. Like, other than there's that one that's sort of dictated by the tower at the south end of the bridge. So I
Yeah,
wonder. Yeah. So I mean, but I know that's
GPS,
Apple.
blue,
That's not
G,
Google.
sorry, GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all of that.
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, look, I guess the reason I've always felt like it's important is because McClelland goes to a lot of lengths in those hearings to discredit, basically to kind of play a little bit. Well, and look, I'm only alleging here, but it seems like he plays dumb about how relevant geofencing is. He says it's not accurate. He doesn't know where the cast report is. He acts like he doesn't really know what stage 1, 2, and 3 are, etc. And basically, then they go to have it suppressed. Now, the defense aren't asking to use it to show Rick's whereabouts. And I don't know, my feeling here, and when we look at this dialogue between the defense and Holeman in this deposition, is either nobody understands what geofencing is, or there's a deliberate muddying of the waters, because Holman's comments here, they don't match geofencing. He can't just show up in the geofence at home in the evening, because that's not how geofencing works, right?
Well, they have to make a perimeter.
That's
So
right.
unless their perimeter included his home and the trails,
Yep.
I mean, yeah,
So
he
that's
could.
absurd, right?
Right,
It's silly. There'd be
exactly.
no point in a geofence. And I think I make the point in this old video, which we can play the rest of in a bit. But I made that point. It's like, if you're trying to say, was Amy G at her house at 10:13 p.m. on the 2nd of January 26? Well, if they're going to do a whole geofence of the entire suburb, then how can they, that's actually quite, no, actually, wait a minute. And that's probably not a good example, but it's just silly. It's not going to pinpoint as much. But then again, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. The
Yeah,
geofence would have just been the trails, wouldn't it?
yeah.
It's not going to be the whole of Delphi, because then you're going to get 7 billion ping. I mean, not 7 billion, but a lot of pings, right? Because
It's a perimeter, so an area at a specific time.
yeah,
It's not just, well, in the month of February, who was
mm,
in Carroll County, what phones came or what devices came in. It's
yeah,
a set period of time in a
yep,
set area.
Which exactly is right. But so otherwise, if their perimeter includes Rick's house and the trails right up until the evening, there's no way anyone would sift through all that data. And why would they do that? It's much more important to see who was on the trails during the time window of, like, let's say 12 till 5, which would be more sensible. I think the cast analysis talks about, I think, those times like 12 till 5 ish, which makes a lot more sense, right?
Yeah. In an urban setting, the geofence accuracy is 3 to 10 meters, very
Mm.
reliable. In a
Mm.
rural setting where they were, it's anywhere from 30 to more than 100 meters, very inaccurate.
Yeah, but still accurate enough though to indicate whether Rick left the trails or not. I think it wouldn't be accurate probably within the trails as much of, was someone on the south end of the bridge or
Right.
closest to the crime scene. But and I think this is the point I've always raised with any of the phone data is even if it can't pinpoint his exact location, what it would show in essence is a kind of direction that he was headed. It wouldn't say, he was exactly at this spot at this time and then this time. It's not like literally like a map, follow the person, but it would be enough to indicate whether, he left the trails and was on his way home. And when Holeman says it just pinged it at his house in the evening, that's suspicious. If that were true, which I don't believe it is, if that were true, then that would look really suspicious. Why is his phone off all day and it only pings at his house in the evening?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
think this is what a lot of the people who think Rick's guilty will say, well, obviously it wasn't exculpatory. But the thing is, it's not, there isn't a grey area here. It's either inculpatory or exculpatory. Because if his phone's off all day and then it only pings in the evening, to me, that looks suspicious, right?
Yeah.
I literally, in this video, when I was listening to it, I made a dramatic point of like, if that's the case, if his phone doesn't show up at the trails at all that day and just pings at his house in the evening, then I'd even probably say, well, I can't be so sure anymore, even though he doesn't match the profile. That's really dodgy. Because he said he was on his phone, and it's highly likely, of course, most people carry their phones around with them most of the time. It should have been pinging multiple times during that day, not just in the evening, which is why either Holman just has no clue what he's talking about, but also I think whoever's questioning him in this deposition doesn't either, because they don't drill down on the fact that what he's saying doesn't make sense.
I would be curious to know how big this perimeter was.
Right?
Yeah. Or if there were two separate geofencing requests. Because his house should not be within a perimeter of the trails.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, the way as well that geofencing works. So you've got stage 1, which should be the small perimeter. It should just be the trails area and the crime scene area. Stage 2, they can then expand the area for a few select phones, because they can then say, well, these are the ones we're concerned about. Where do they go before? Where do they go after? And then stage 3 is basically uncovering who those phones are, subscriber information. So if Holeman is saying that Rick was in the geofence, that means they have stage 3 data on Rick. I don't believe that, because if they have stage 3 data on Rick, then they should be able to see him going to his mum's house, coming home, going to the trails. And to me, if he's then their offender, it's either going to show pretty incriminating stuff, or secondly, it's going to show his phone was off a lot, which is also, to me, suspicious. And this is a group of law enforcement who said he had the bridge guy starter kit just because he had a blue jacket. So I doubt that they wouldn't have used it if there was anything suspicious about it. And instead, what they did was try to elude it to some extent. Like, it sounds like Jennifer's saying, if this is July 31, 2024, and she's saying that they only seem to have stage 1 data, they don't have the full cast report. And then McClelland argues that this data, isn't reliable at all. He doesn't say it's up to 100 meters. He makes it seem like it's, kilometers away or miles away, which is more in line with tower dubs. And yeah, I just feel this is another one of those times where they're hoping that everybody doesn't have a good enough understanding of digital data to let it slip. between the cracks. And I think that's what's happened here.
Well, there would have had to been warrants to get geofence data. Let's have a look at them, see what the parameters were.
So this is where I always say I don't like to criticize the defense team too heavily. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I wasn't there. Hindsight's 2020. But I just don't think this defense team did fully understand digital data. And as a result of that, they didn't know what to ask for. I think that's, to me, that's the kind of conclusion I keep coming back to. They had too many other things they were looking at. They were pushed for time. They had to argue being put back on the case. And even in a recent interview, Andy still doesn't seem confident that they could trace Rick's phone. And yet, if, as Holeman is now saying in his deposition, he was in the geofence, then they could have done at least a rough tracing of Rick's phone. So either everybody, and this is why the title of today was like, does anybody understand geofencing in Delphi? Because it just doesn't seem like they do. Or maybe I don't understand it, but like to me, and like I know it's not like so clear, like, we're tracing a little, I don't even know what's the word. You're tracing someone's like a highlighted track on a map as they're moving around. Like if you put a GPS on your cat or something and you can watch them walking around the garden. But I mean, it definitely still had some capacity. And what Holeman is saying here doesn't make any sense. He cannot be saying Rick is in the geofence, but only pinging in the evening at his home.
Yeah, that's a heck of a perimeter.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And if the accuracy in an area like that is only, 30 to 100 plus meters, the bigger the perimeter, the less accurate it's going to be.
Exactly.
But
and realistically, then you're including the whole town of Delphi.
Right.
Nobody's going to be able to sift through all of that. It's silly.
Exactly. The reason it works so accurately in an urban setting is because that area just has to be small, and then you might have a lot of numbers there just because population is bigger. But there are going to be some of them who they're not lingering during. They might be there before, they might be there immediately after, but the time in between is minimal. So clearly they're just lingering. You're going to weed them out. And it's just going to be a process of elimination. And then maybe you have 5 phones left that could possibly be involved. But that would be an enormous perimeter.
That's correct. Exactly. It's silly.
It's going to include everyone with a device in Carroll County.
Exactly.
How do we know? Were you 100 plus meters from there, or were you 30 meters?
Yep.
Were you
exactly?
How do we know? And the time matters. So the abduction happened whatever time it happened, but then his phone's at home in the evening. So what was this? A 30-day time period to go with the entire perimeter of Carroll County? I don't understand how this happens.
No, because it's a complete butchering of geofencing. That's the thing. That's not how it works, right?
Yeah, but Holeman says it with such arrogance that it's you have to stop and think, well, am I confused?
But this is just what you and I were talking about, that when you receive information from a source that is so confident and arrogant and indignant, you really should never believe that, because that's usually going to be an indicator that they probably don't know what they're talking about, or they're deliberately deceiving you,
Yep.
Because he's not right. No matter what they did or didn't find, what he's saying in this deposition, it's just a couple of pages worth that I know we're talking about at length, but it's not correct. And the fact that whoever's questioning him in this interaction, I think it's Rosie, but one of the defense doesn't realize it's not correct, suggests I think the defense team didn't understand digital forensics. And again, that's not their fault. They're not supposed to be, knowledgeable about everything, but I don't think they actually had an expert who looked at this side of the case. They used their digital forensic funds, I suppose, for Eldridge and looking at Libby's phone. And, I have thoughts about that too, but I don't think anyone actually ever really explored this angle particularly well, which is such a shame, because I do still think, even if it's rough and it's vague, it's still going to give, if you're getting stage 3 geofencing data for Rick, as Holeman is indicating apparently here, then they would still be able to get enough information, provided he has a Google account, which he had an Android phone, provided he has location sensors on, there'd still be enough information to indicate a rough timeline for him for that day. When did he leave?
Yeah.
His mum's at Peru, because you'd get that even as well from phone records, because his tower, his sign off from one tower and sector would change as well. So even if you didn't have geofencing, his cell tower, cell information would still show, when he left Peru, for example, because that would help us kind of firm up his timeline better. I just think they're playing dumb.
I don't think they're playing.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at the picture on the screen of Holeman's face. It's almost like he's saying, "Do you believe me?"
Yeah. It's concerning. It's definitely concerning. I'm going to play the best. I don't even know what I'm saying today. I'm going to play the rest of the video. But if you're happy to stay on, and we can pause it and talk about it at points, or was there anything else you wanted to say before I play this old video again?
No, I'm good.
No, but if you stick around and just in the chat, if anyone wants us to stop it, Dee, if you want to stop, you can let me know as well. We can stop and chat about it. But yeah, when I listened back to this, I was like, oh, I forgot that. That's interesting as well. So let's just see what past Amy had to say about Holeman's words back in October. You don't? Because seems like that's a habit of yours. I reserve my snark for the investigators in this case. I don't like to be too snarky about people in general, but goodness, how can you not be? This is ridiculous, first of all. It was later on in the evening. So what, his phone didn't ping all day till the evening? That would be suspicious. And if that was truly the case, they would have totally used that against Rick. So this is ludicrous. If you understand how geofence data and tower dumps work, this is absolutely ridiculous what he's saying here. And again, we'll go through it in more detail in a minute, but just to give you the gist. So Rosie says, but not necessarily the exact location of it. He says, correct. You just know it was within a certain range. Right. And within that range was, I assume, most of the city of Delphi and his home. Yeah, the crime scene, his home. Yeah, pretty close. Wasn't overly helpful, basically. No, it was not. So a minute ago, he said that the geofencing phone data was helpful. And then the next page, he's saying it wasn't. Now, one of the issues here, guys, is that if the geofence were containing the whole city of Delphi, including the crime scene and his home, that would not be useful. Of course not. Because that's not going to reveal anybody being close to the crime scene or on the trails that day. It's ridiculous. That would not be particularly useful. No one would use that. A geofence needs to be contained to certain areas because otherwise it has no benefit whatsoever. So this whole statement makes no sense whatsoever. So, Dee, that's kind of what we were just talking about, right? Like,
yeah.
On the one hand, he says it was useful, but on the other hand, it wasn't useful because it contained the whole of Delphi. Geofencing or phone data clearly wasn't useful in this case because it didn't help them catch the offenders. So what is he even talking about?
Yeah. Really, all he could confirm was that, yes, we had some data and it confirms that Rick existed that day and he had a device.
Yep. Now, what a useless conversation this is in a deposition. And it concerns me that neither side seem to see how useless this is. I mean, they move on, sure. Oh, sorry, that's just my microwave going in the background, guys. I'm just making some caramel slice as we talk. But yeah, it's just the problem here is either nobody in this conversation understands it, but then why are they even asking about it? But then they don't really understand what it means. Yeah, I
think
know.
they expected him to have better answers.
Mm.
I mean,
And then when he doesn't, they don't push him.
If I'm asking my kids for some details about a project at school, I assume that they're going to come home and give me the answers that the teacher told them, you have to do this, this, and this. But that's rarely what they tell me. So I'm kind of stumped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they thought these are the questions we need to ask. He'll know the answers. He's an investigator. Of course he'll know. Not so much.
You know, this case literally is like, you know, those exams you do in English when you're in like primary school and then high school where they give you a passage and you've got to read it and you've got to answer like the questions about it.
Yes.
And the thing is, it feels like nobody actually listened or read any of this in any depth. It was like, okay, he said that, never mind, move on. Whereas for me, this incident is very similar to Kathy Shank and Dan Doolan's testimony at trial, where it's like there are logical inconsistencies here. We don't just drop it and move on. We go, wait a minute, what you're saying, Mr. Holeman or Lieutenant Holeman, doesn't make sense. How can it be helpful? But again, I think that takes you needing to fully understand it yourself. And this is my concern again here. Again, I don't like to go against the defense and say, you know, I'm sure they're amazing at the legal side of things, but unfortunately, I think that they dropped the ball with digital forensics. I don't think they understand it.
No, I don't think so.
Hi, Aisha. Nice to see you. Okay, we'll go back to the video for a bit and I'll pause it the next time I get really annoyed by something that I hear, which will probably be in like 2 seconds. It's absolutely ludicrous. So, like many things in this case, at first glance, it sounds like they're using this advanced digital evidence to rule things in and out. You know, we've got the Mead Hex identifier on the PCA, and now we've got him talking about the geofence, and we've got this cast data, and it makes it seem like they did this really thorough investigation. You know, we've got the tip cleared that says the phone info was provided to ISP. It's like, look, we've done so much to check out phones and you know, geofences and locations, and that would be great if they had, because if they had done that, we'd probably find that Rick would be sitting at home with Kathy right now and not have gone through this entire ordeal, because they haven't done that, or they have done that. And we don't seem to have seen any evidence, though, of full disclosure of that. And I don't mean to us necessarily, but to the defense. Or if it has been disclosed to the defense, it's been disclosed in a way that is so, what's the word? Obscured, you know. It's like been presented as pages and pages of printouts and numbers or spreadsheets or whatever, and it's been hard to decode, right? It's a minefield. So when you understand how tower dumps, geofencing, and FBI cast actually work, that comment just does not make any sense. He never mentions tower sectors or CDRs, and he clearly conflates geofence with a wide area, low precision phone location sweep covering both the crime scene and Alan's home, which of course would not be very useful in a case of this type where we're dealing with a very small town. So let's go back. Why do I think he's conflating geofence with phone dump? Well, because a geofence would not be large enough to cover that entire area. That doesn't really make sense. I mean, you could do that, of course, but it wouldn't be useful. It's like trying to pinpoint where I am, but doing the geofence of the whole suburb that I live in. I mean, that's not going to pinpoint. It's just going to say I was in the suburb. Well, duh. I mean, Rick Allen was in Delphi that day. He lives there. So, yeah, just ridiculous. So I don't think he's actually referring to geofence there. Another reason I don't think he's referring to geofence data is because if they checked the geofence data and saw Rick's phone ping within that data, then that would mean that they had stage 3 data for Rick, which is exactly what we'd all love to see. And just a reminder of what stage 3 data is, I'll just skip forward a little bit. So there's the 3 stages of geofencing. So first of all, they get this anonymized device list, which I believe that Jennifer talks about in the July 30, 31, August 1st, 24 hearings. Can't remember which one of them it is, but she talks about the fact that they have stage 1 data, but they didn't have stage 2 or stage 3. Now, stage 2 means that they get the location history for selected devices, but it is still anonymized. And in stage 3, they can uncover the subscriber identification. So if they had geofencing and they were able to say solidly that Rick did ping in the geofence, then that means to know it was Rick that pinged in the geofence, they would need to have had his stage 3 data, which wouldn't just provide you with one ping or a couple of pings. It would provide you with a multitude of information over the course of a day or however long the geofence was. And so what that would show would be super detailed. And what we know from geofencing location data is that it is a lot more accurate than Nick McClelland made it seem. So, I can't remember the exact distance, but it's pretty accurate. And so if they had geofencing data stage 3 for Rick, we would be able to have a pretty good idea of his movements that day. And I'd love to see that. I think we all would, right? Because for sure, if that geofencing data shows that his phone doesn't move all day until the evening, then yes, I'd be concerned. And yes, I'd take down my channel. Happy to do that. I will take down all my advocacy if you can show me that Rick Allen is either at the trails, throughout the crime time, or that he has left his phone at home all day. That would be concerning. I would say, well, now I'm a bit doubtful, right? But clearly they don't have that because they would be screaming it from the rooftops if they did. I don't believe that they've ever shown stage 3 geofence data for Rick to the defense. I don't necessarily believe there isn't stage 3 geofence data, but I just don't believe that the defense have actually seen it or been able to find it within the mess of discovery. So clearly he's not talking about geofence data if he's suggesting that Rick's phone showed up at home later in the evening, because we know Rick went to the trails that day. That's not a secret. We know that Rick went to his mum's house that day. So there would certainly be information to suggest when he returned back into the Delphi area and what he was doing within the Delphi area if there was geofence data. I don't think there was. Okay. Or I do think there might have been, but that's not what Holeman is referring to here. So let's go back. So remember, law enforcement had Rick's phone identifiers in 2017, and I've got the lovely tip narrative stuff here for us to remind ourselves, this is the MEAD and the MEAD hex. It didn't have an IMEI, and that's just because of the type of phone it was, but it had the MEAD and the MEAD hex, and these instead would have been super helpful in terms of tracking his phone. And we know here it says nothing new, phone info provided to ISP. So yeah, they should have been able to tell us a lot more about what Rick was or wasn't doing. So yeah, basically it's a digital fingerprint. It allows them.
Yeah, quietly, just looking at what quietly said, Dita, I'm going to pop the comment on the screen. So the feeling that people weren't telling the truth about their movements. Well, one of the things that I looked into with Brad Weber, because I was thinking about that 207 car that appears to pull in and pull out quite quickly. And my new theory being that maybe that car was intended to meet Bridge Guy with the girls on the south end, down the hill. there is actually a gate there on that driveway, and whether it's locked or not, there is definitely a chain that gives the impression of being locked. So again, if we add another couple of minutes for Weber actually driving into his private drive and opening that gate and then potentially closing it again, this 2:25 time frame is ridiculous. Any thoughts on that, Dina? Sorry.
Remember at some point, it might even have just been in somebody's chat. They're talking about Rick has an oddly named email address.
Oh, yes.
Where did that information come from? Do you know?
I have no idea. I remember hearing something. I think it was Yellow Jacket on X was talking about they subpoena stuff for some of the Google accounts, but they don't seem to subpoena all of his Google accounts. It seems kind of selective again in terms of what they're doing with searches on him in 2022.
Because if they had stage 3 info, what that would include would be the Google account holder's name.
Yep.
Their email address, I wonder, recovery phone number, and any linked IP addresses.
Yeah.
So if this email address is for real, and that really did come out somewhere, I wonder if that's one of the things they got with their linked IP addresses and all the information from stage 3 data.
Possible.
And guess who you said you thought it was Yellow Jacket. That all fits in with everything I know about her.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's actually a good point. It could have come from the geofence information. And another thing that I raised way back when we talked about geofence stuff was the fact that Cheyenne Mill receives a call from the FBI 6 months after the murders. She receives a call asking for the owner of the phone, and they're actually asking for her mum, right? And she says to them, no, my mum pays for this, but it's my phone. And when they recognize that it's Cheyenne Mill and she's a known witness, they're like, okay, cool. So to me, that again was an indicator that the FBI and law enforcement had access to the phones that were pinging on the bridge that day. That can't be, they couldn't have been calling up every person in Delphi. They called Cheyenne Mill because her phone would have pinged on the south end of the bridge because she walked across the bridge. I think it's around 3:30 and she goes and needs to go to the toilet, and I think they're having a smoke, her and Shelby. And that was super interesting because Cheyenne had already gone forward. So they had her number and they had her name. And yet the FBI must have been running some sort of phone analysis to call that phone up and ask for her mum, who was the person who was linked to that number, not Cheyenne.
Yeah.
And this is why I said, I remember right back then, I mean, poor Cheyenne was treated really poorly by law enforcement. She tried to contact them, and they literally disregarded her for the first couple of weeks. And they finally did a quick interview with her. They didn't take her phone identifiers. Interesting, right? They weren't interested. And yet, obviously, at some point, that something's been run that has indicated that phone. And they didn't seem to recognize it was Cheyenne. So that suggests some underlying phone analysis was going on. And this is exactly why I believe the FBI, law enforcement, whichever part of Unified Command, somebody there was able to know who was roughly in that area, because Cheyenne, we know, would have been one of the closest people to the crime scene, not because she's guilty or suspicious, of course, but because she admits she walked across the bridge. She's one of the only people that did walk across the bridge that day.
Right.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I love the irony in it, I think is probably the term, because they treated Cheyenne Mill like total, like nothing, as though she was an idiot and she was wasting their time. And wouldn't it be funny if Cheyenne Mill and her testimony at the trial actually uncovers the secrets that they're trying to potentially allegedly keep. Yeah. Anyway, I love a good story like that. You know, the woman scorned and all of that. So shout out to Cheyenne. You might be the hidden key. Yeah, but interesting stuff. Hey Mustang, nice to see you. There's just too much here that to do with the phones that just doesn't make sense. And I think that the defense focused so heavily on Libby's phone, and then they focused so heavily on these unidentified phones, the third-party suspects, that they didn't necessarily recognize that geofencing and phone data could not only help figure out maybe Rick's movements that day, but also would really help to firm up the timeline. See-Through and I could finally end our ongoing debate about where Rick saw the girls, because we would see potentially phones pinging and we'd be able to see where they potentially cross paths. So, yeah, anyway, I just think that they had people dedicated to the phones early on. We have Doolan saying that he provided the phone info to that particular division. I can't remember what he calls it, but it's the people in charge of that in the ISP. That wasn't part of the lead packet itself. He gave the lead packet in, he gave the phone info to that particular division. And then also we have the very fact that they're collecting an IMEI or a Mead hex. They don't just do that willy-nilly. They didn't collect it from Cheyenne Mill. They did collect it from Rick Allen, which again, to me, I really truly believe Rick was a semi-person of interest in 2017. They weren't 100% concerned about him. They were obviously setting their sights on Ron Logan, but they also didn't just dismiss him and say, oh yeah, the guy that kind of looks a little bit like Bridge Guy, who's the only guy on the trails in that time frame, who saw the 3 girls and 4 girls saw Bridge Guy. Nah, we don't need to worry about him. He's not an issue. It just sounds too silly to me. I think they did clear him in 2017. But the lost tip narrative, which is a ridiculous story, was easier for them to explain away than explaining away why they actually cleared him, because then they may have to actually divulge material that they don't want to divulge.
Well, first they need some time to figure out what they're going to say, because they don't understand it.
Interesting quote as well that I saw on X today. Spooky had put this up. And this is a direct quote of Nick McClelland. And he says, and as for exculpatory evidence, we get to decide what that is. That's a direct quote, apparently, from Nick McClelland. And as for exculpatory evidence, we get to decide what that is. How problematic is that, right?
No kidding.
Right? Because if they get to decide, then they get to decide that whatever they used in 2017 to clear Rick is not exculpatory evidence that they have to share. Because they didn't clear him. They accidentally lost a tip with 10 different pages floating around for years. But, you know, the fact that they were willing to provide that as the story for why they made a mistake with Rick Allen, you know, such a ridiculous, obscure story, means the real story must be more concerning, I think.
Okay. Did you say that you thought, when we were talking earlier, that you thought the geofencing data was requested in 2019?
I think that's what I remember reading it somewhere, that's when the warrant to Google was sent.
Okay, so he was cleared in 2017. In 2019, they got the warrant and printed the tip again.
Exactly. See, when we join the dots, right? My sense is Kathy Shank's role maybe in 2019 was to go back over the witnesses, print their investigative leads, and let's cross-check them now against the geofencing. But I think Rick, maybe the phone data in 2017 that cleared Rick might have been Nilo's and Tower Dumps and cell information. I forget it. What's it? CDR. Because it's not super accurate, but it would have given them at least enough to go, yeah, you know what, this guy's on the phone, or he does a handoff with the sector. He must have been driving through town. Like they'd have at least a vague idea that this guy's not our guy, and we can kind of deprioritize him, not necessarily clear him. And then in 2019, I think that's when he's technically officially cleared.
I think so too. That
Interesting,
makes sense.
isn't it?
That makes sense that way.
Yep. So it's really concerning. And, there's something that this story doesn't add up. Why was Kathy Shank printing it in 2019? She wasn't just batch printing everyone. She was printing that particular investigative thread. Yeah. And to me, that was the final capacity to be able to go, this Rick guy, we really don't need to worry about him. We were never really worried about him because we kind of had enough data to say he wasn't the guy, but now we know he's not. So that's definitely where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So if we can get all the phone data, I think that there's potentially a whole heap of things that need to be looked at as to whether they're exculpatory. It's no accident that they took his phone identifiers. And interestingly, what's really gross about it as well is that they then put those phone identifiers on the PCA, like as though they were related to the probable cause. How ridiculous, because they're not. They're not related to his guilt or their suspected guilt in any way. There's so many smoke screens here. It gives the illusion here of, to the judge who's signing the PCA, they've got his phone identifiers. They must have traced him to the scene or something. But it's not actually said that they traced him to the scene. It feels like they're always giving this illusion that they've done so much more than they actually have. So,
And they got his phone identifiers, but then when they searched his house, they made a big deal of a single phone that they couldn't locate. I mean, I have personally destroyed several phones accidentally.
Of course.
Don't come looking for any of mine, but the one he was actually using at the time, they had all that. So why are we making an issue out of a single phone in all those years that he no longer had?
And I mean, look, the innocent explanation for that, I think, is I think Kathy had said that maybe one phone got run over by the lawnmower or something.
Right.
But I mean, I've even got a suspicious explanation, not suspicious for Rick, but for the police, is that it would not be convenient for them to have that phone because guess what? Celebrite, right? Because if you have a Celebrite extraction of that phone, well, guess what? We can see from Libby's phone, it gives pretty accurate GPS coordinates.
It just seems, I just don't understand why that is such a widespread bone of contention on YouTube anyway. This phone is missing. Of course he's guilty. Of course he was hiding it. But they had the phone that he was using already.
And so, I mean, this is really, like, for me, leaning heavily into conspiracy, and I don't want to overdo it, but I tend to do it when it comes to this phone stuff. The only people it was convenient for the phone to be missing is the people who wanted to make a case against Rick Allen. It was actually inconvenient for Rick because I would probably bet a lot of money that if that phone were available now and there was a Celebrite extraction done, and you want to give me the equivalent Knowledge C, whatever it's called on Android, I think we could pick apart and find Rick's timeline that would indicate he is not the murderer of Abby and Libby. So kind of sad that phone's missing.
I feel like we're on the same wavelength there, but now I'm just going to spend the rest of my life thinking, why did this ever become such a big deal?
Because law enforcement made a big deal of things, you know, and the media did as well. And the people who believe Rick's guilty, they made a massive deal of all of these ridiculously circumstantial, unimportant facts. And that was put out on a loudspeaker. So anyone new to the case who doesn't have the time to dig in and look at the details goes, well, the bullet from his gun was found there. He disposed of his 2017 phone. He had a blue jacket. He had the bridge guy starter kit. Like, it's all that same stupid stuff that keeps getting raised, because that's what the mainstream and law enforcement story has been. It sounds like people will literally say things like that. And I look, prior to me looking into it deeply as well, I also was like, oh, well, I guess if they found his gun at the scene, then that's suspicious. I'm not his gun, sorry, the bullet from his gun, because I didn't look into what tool mark analysis is. And the worst thing is that you get experts who will come in and say, well, that is accurate. That tool mark analysis is accurate. It's like, no. It's accurate if you compare a spent round with a spent round, not an unspent with a spent round. The problem is most people don't look into it any deeper. I mean, I didn't initially. And so, yeah, they make it seem suspicious. You know, the one phone that he would have used at the time. I mean, it's ludicrous anyway. I've said this a million times. Like, you don't just have one era of your life where you're deviant. So why wouldn't he have got rid of more than one phone? You know, like, he doesn't have anything bad on any of his phones. So why, like, the 2017 phone was the one year that he decided, you know what, I'm going to do something different in my life. I'm going to become a sadistic offender just for a year and just with 2 victims, and then I'm done. Yeah, one hit wonder serial killer. Like, no, that's. Yeah. I mean, that's you know, that's probably people like Brian Koberger or something, but they get caught. That's why they're a one hit wonder. Yeah, I hate to even joke about it. It's not a joking matter, but it's like it's this is the stuff. Like, you know, I don't like it when we say everything is silly and ridiculous, but this is ridiculous, right?
I think so. I think it's not even that. I feel it's ridiculous. I feel it's so outrageous. Not that people following this are too stupid to understand, so it's just ridiculous.
No.
It's so beyond believable that it's outrageous. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a problem that we're stupid.
No.
It's a problem that we're seeing something that's so off the beaten track. Like, this is just not how our brains aren't meant to function in this sort of reality.
No, and that's the thing. Yeah, I never want anyone to think, if they didn't see this, that they're silly, because, I mean, like I said, I didn't see it. I believed a lot of this stuff too early on. And I think it's only because I've literally, gosh, how many hours of digging, trying to understand this stuff, have I been able to kind of like find some semblance of understanding of, you know, the fact that, you know, this doesn't make sense. But I mean, that's taken hours, and most people don't have hours to do that. I mean, I openly say I am, you know, someone with ADHD who is obsessive and probably has some autistic traits, so I can get really stuck on something and never give up. But like, most people don't have the time to look at cases and dig this deep, even the actual investigative teams, like for the defense and stuff, because they also have to juggle a million other cases as well. I just think it's like, it's hard. I mean, I expected that law enforcement are trying to do the job of catching the real offender. So I would assume we should be able to trust what they're saying.
Right.
But you can't. I mean, not in this case anyway.
See, that exactly. The rules that always apply don't apply all the time.
Now, and I mentioned this in yesterday's live, because when I first came into this case, I heard people saying conspiracies and cover-ups. I didn't believe that stuff, right? Because I am probably a bit naive, and I do tend to trust the police. But when I looked up the statistics of police misconduct in investigations, it's not 0% of the time. I'm not saying it's 100% either,
right.
But there is a significant enough percentage for us to say it's more likely that law enforcement did some very dubious things in this case than it is a chance that Richard Allen is the offender of this crime, which is literally close to 0%.
Yeah.
And I think that bears thinking about. I know people don't take psychology seriously. Psychology is based on statistics, though, guys. No middle-aged man with no known history of deviance. He's now been incarcerated for 3 years, guys. If there was any deviance, it would have shown by now. And no man who has no history of deviance at middle age just suddenly decides to go out and abduct and murder 2 girls and then stage their bodies in strange poses. That just doesn't happen. And I'm not saying that based on, well, I don't think that happens. If you can find me that documented case, I always offer that challenge up. I'm happy to look at it, but there is no case. So there are 0 cases of someone like Rick, doing a crime like this, but there are not 0 cases of law enforcement lying. In fact, there's a case here in Australia that I've quoted before, Daniel Morecambe, a very sad case of a teenage boy who went missing on his way to go Christmas shopping and was murdered. And there was misconduct in that case. The lead investigators did actually not follow up on some detectives who tipped in the true offender for many, many years. That case went unsolved, and the real offender had been interviewed in the early days of the investigation. And when this went to a commission, the detectives who said, well, we told the lead investigator all along, the lead investigator actually disposed of information that showed that they had made a mistake. So that's a real case. That's a real case here in Australia. And I was shocked because I didn't actually know that. I knew of Daniel Morecambe. It was a big case here. We don't have a lot of these big cases in Australia. It's just a smaller population, just a different kind of demographic. But gosh, I mean, how awful. Those poor parents sat for years not having any justice. So that was a case of a failed follow-up of a tip, but then a cover-up of the fact that they failed to follow up the tip. Now here we've got law enforcement saying, oh, we failed to follow up the tip, but we're willing to just air all of that and tell you how we failed to follow up on it because it was filed away incorrectly and an old lady helping us with filing found it. It's just, they're not even trying to cover up their mistake, and nobody got in trouble for their quote-unquote mistake. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
There should have been, should there not be a royal commission? I don't know what you guys call it there. And here it's called a royal commission into that, because here in Australia, the fact that a young boy's life was taken and the investigators didn't follow up on the true offender when they should have for years went to what we call a royal commission. It was investigated. But in Indiana, they're saying that they knew about Rick all along and he's the offender. And yet Holeman got an award, right? That's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yes, it's weird.
Sorry, I get so heated about this stuff, Dee. This is where the snark comes out. When I talk about a lot of the other stuff, I don't get so snarky, but this stuff just is it's too much.
I have some thoughts, but they're not very nice, so I'm not going to say them.
Yeah, I'm not holding back as much today. I find when I start talking about certain investigators in this case, I find it really hard to hold back. But when it comes to when it comes to the other stuff, the more sensitive stuff, I tend to be a little bit more measured in my approach. But yeah, I'm just having a look at the chat. Sorry, guys, I don't mean to ignore you guys. I'm just on my soapbox. But Aisha is talking about BK. I know Brian Koberger is another case where people have a lot of different opinions. I didn't really deep dive into it much. I was interested in the early days, but I didn't really follow the Koberger stuff. Did you, Dita?
No.
So I don't want to over comment on that, Aisha. I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough. I do know, though, that there's a lot of contention in the different camps for that too. And T-Profile wanted to tell us a story. Let me just check if there's anything else up there. You're totally welcome to T-Profile. Let us know. Pop the story in the chat and we can pop it up on the screen. And Milliken Man says that's like the statistics that it's actually safer to fly than it is to drive. When we hear of a plane crash, it's big news, but compared to all the flights that go on in the world every day, it's 1 in a million chance. That's the statistic I always use for my clients with a flying phobia. Like, don't want you to feel scared driving, but realistically, there's far more chance of you being hurt in a car crash than there is in a plane crash. Just looking at Aisha. Aisha's talking. I think you're talking about Brian Koberger, Aisha. Yeah, like I said, I don't know enough about it. It's interesting because Koberger and the Idaho 4 case is what led me to Delphi, because I was watching Grizzly True Crime around the time of the Idaho 4 case. But I kind of ditched Idaho 4 and got obsessed with Delphi instead. So yeah, I haven't followed it a lot.
I love Grizzly.
Yeah, yeah. She's awesome, isn't she? She's really good. She's really,
I love her
really
accent,
thorough. Yeah, and she's fun. I like her snark too.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, look, so T profile, probably not at this stage, just because we're going to continue talking about the geofencing, but you're totally welcome to send me some more info about your story about reporting Rick, for sure. So we're just looking at Milliken Man. So there's law enforcement corruption, but not so common. There's zero chance Rick could be guilty. I mean, I would never, we can never say 0%, essentially. But it's pretty close to that, because in the whole history of crime, I have not been able to find an adult onset offender who does just one crime, which is a sadistic organized murder of 2 teenage victims, and has not even the slightest inkling of deviance in their past. Russell Williams is always the one that comes up. He's the closest, but Russell Williams certainly showed deviance. He showed escalation. There was obvious indicators of his deviance after arrest as well. So he's still not comparable to Rick Allen. Any thoughts on that, Dee? Russell Williams is Canadian, right?
Yes, he is.
You get lots of the good ones there.
He had some control issues going
Absolutely.
way back. And
absolutely.
I mean, it suited him well in the military.
Mm-hmm.
But it was leaking all over.
Mm-hmm. And leaking's the exact right word, because leakage is exactly what we're talking about here. There is leakage. So we actually looked through the start of a case study on Russell Williams, some weeks ago now. And as you pick apart his history, you see control, domination. So what is sadism? Sadism is all about control, domination, power, humiliation. Rick has none of that. And in fact, Rick hated power. It made him so anxious and stressed out. Thomas Bruce as well sees through, same thing. I know I still haven't done a video on this because I'm always jumping around, but Thomas Bruce, again, is someone who had, as far as I'm aware, some elements of control, narcissism. Also, his offense was not an organized sadistic offense. It was a disorganized offense. It's a very, very different crime, very different personality type as well. Thomas Bruce is still rare, as is Russell Williams. They're very rare cases. They are outliers. So, they're rare in and of themselves. And Rick isn't even like the rarest of the rare. So, I think that's the degree of rarity, I suppose, if Rick were to be the offender. As I've said before, I would call him a forensic unicorn. Okay, guys, it's getting late here. It's 11. What I'm going to do is just play the rest of the YouTube video. And I'm probably not going to do any more talking, just because I literally have to get these dogs ready for bed and feed my cats some more bickies and stuff. So, Dee, I would love for you to come back and have a chat with me again at some point in the near future, if you'd love to.
Yes.
Yeah, but what I might do now is just play the end of the video, which will go for a little while. We've still got another 20 minutes of this video, and then might just end the stream, if that's okay.
Sounds good. I was just reading back in the chat.
Yeah, we can still chat. So I'll still be chatting amongst doing my end of night chores with the pets. So I'll still be in the chat.
All right.
Okay.
Everybody have a good night.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
able to trace that specific handset across network records and databases that logs the device activity. So just a little bit more about what it means. So what I think he's referring to here potentially is tower dumps as opposed to geofence. But even still, tower dumps would still potentially have been super useful when it came to helping us understand what Rick's movements were that day. Because when you've got an IMEI or a MEAD, a hex number or a MEAD number, look, I'm not an expert in which one of those is the choice that we use in terms of MEAD or MEAD hex, but the reality is you'll get timestamp, tower, sector, and we'll talk about what sector is again, but I talked about last time, IMEI or MEAD, IMSI, and activity type. So you would get data. It's not just one ping. You don't go, well, here's a tower dump between 12 and 5, and he just pinged once. Well, if he just pinged once in that time, it means his phone was off or out of range. Like that doesn't really make sense. So just a reminder, this is from the last presentation. Even if there are only 2 cell towers in Delphi, and even if one tower covers most of the area that we're thinking about, well, there are 3 sectors. So it basically, at least 3 sectors, sometimes there's more, but let's just say 3 sectors. That means that if there is a phone in this area of the kind of coverage of the tower, it will ping this tower, but it will also be sector 1. If it's in this area, or if it moves to this area, you'll then be able to see it ping here, here, here. Well, you won't know within the sector, but you'll know that it's here and then it's here, and it might bounce back and forth if somebody lives on the cusp of the sector or something. Now, I don't know what the sectors are in Delphi and for the Wells towers, so I can't comment on which sectors it would be in. I had on the previous presentation mapped it, and I think we determined that the angle between the crime scene and Rick's home was large enough that it was highly likely that it would have been covered by 2 different sectors. So when they do a tower dump, they would have the timestamp, again, as I mentioned, the device ID, the activity type, so call, text, data, and they'd have the tower ID and sector ID. So it's not good enough to say, well, the crime scene and his home were all covered by the same tower, so done, dusted. Not very helpful. Well, actually, it still could have been helpful, because if the tower sectors map the way I think they probably would, where his home is in one sector and the crime scene and the trails is in another sector, then you would be able to see vaguely when he is passing between sectors. Now, it's not an exact science, and tower dump data is certainly less accurate in terms of range of movement than geofence, but it still would give us a vague idea. It wouldn't just be one ping in the evening at his home. So there's that. And then on top of that, you can see it also says activity type. So again, even if you're pinging within the same sector, you're going to get multiple pings when somebody's calling, texting, when they're exchanging data, things like that. I actually looked this up. Give me a sec. It's on my phone. But I looked up, would it be likely he wouldn't be using his phone between the hours of, say, 12 and 5 on a weekday? And of course, that's not likely. We all know that anecdotally, but ChatGPT is so wonderful. Always gives me statistics as well. Give me a sec. Where did I save it? Yeah, here we go. It says average usage patterns. This is 2019, but I'm sure it wouldn't have been much different in 2017. And it said people check their phones about 96 times per day. I'm sure I told more than that. Roughly every 10 to 12 minutes. The average person spends 4 to 5 hours per day on their phone. And even light users interact with their phones dozens of times per day, mostly short checks, texts, notifications, unlocks, background syncs. So statistically, going for multiple continuous hours without any interaction would be in the lowest few percentiles of behavior. So it'd be basically someone leaving their phone behind, turning it off, or putting it in airplane mode. So even if somebody isn't touching it as well, there's background sync data as well. So, there would still potentially be pings. So I think there would be multiple pings of Rick's phone on tower dump data from that time. And if they screened that for his particular phone identifier, the Mead, then they would be able to see roughly, going to track the pings. And I talked about this in more detail in the longer presentation a few weeks ago, but that would give you, again, a pretty rough indication of like a behavioral timeline, if that makes sense. So like, for example, I just picked up my phone then and I opened up ChatGPT. So that would have been a ping at 9:56 in my time, and it would have said data activity. And now I may not use my phone for a while, and I'm not reading the chat too much, guys, because unfortunately my screen is tiny, but I can see, Shibi, you were saying if you're walking, you wouldn't be. Yeah, so like I may now, as you know, after this, I'm going to go for a walk with Spooky, and I may not take my phone, or I may take my phone and just have it in my pocket, and I probably won't ping. And then I may not ping for a couple of hours because my work, actually, I can't use my phone at all unless I'm using my phone for the work. So it may not ping unless I receive a message. I think it would ping still, but it may still have background syncing. But the average person, particularly someone on their day off on a weekday, is highly likely to be using their phone at least some of the time. And we know that Rick says he was using his phone that day. So anyway, there are lots of ways that tower dump data could still provide some useful information. It may not be the most accurate of accurate things, but it certainly would be indicative of whether Rick is telling the truth with his story, which, I mean, I think he is. Also, what this would show potentially is when he enters the Delphi area again, and we know that in the morning he wasn't in the area. So again, it could help map onto that timeline, and understand when did he return from his mum's house, when did he get back in that area. And again, I think that could help us roughly figure out when he likely then was at the trails. Now, again, like I said, a lot of this wouldn't necessarily be exact, but it would still be, I think it would be circumstantial evidence in his favor if it says or shows what I feel like it does. So this is just more about what could still be learnt. So frequency of pings, so many rapid events would show you that the person's like consisting on their phone. If we look at Libby's knowledge C data, which, I've talked about a lot in the last week or so, you can see, that there are multiple activities that happen. Now, I know that's a young person and they're doing more on their phone, but you'd still be able to kind of gauge a little bit of what potentially is the activity of that phone. You get sector transitions, so going between these sectors. They've got them as B and C, I've got them as numbers, but same diff. So that could show you movement around the town. Timing versus statement. So if pings stop exactly when he claims to be home, possibly powered down or not. Neighbor tower handoff. So that's kind of what I said. So moving back into the home area or out of the home area. Network type switch. So that could hint physical movement. Okay, anyway, so even if one sector spans both home and trail, pattern analysis can still test consistency with this story. So, yeah, I mean, this is just more of saying the same thing. So it's like, what would be the value of having the tower dump data, even if we didn't have the geofencing, which we know they do have geofencing too. And there are ways to use them combined, which, again, you can go back to the last presentation for that because I don't want to repeat it. But, yeah, there's a lot of information that we can get. So even if, again, I did have here, even if it is the same sector, because I know that would be what would be argued probably by prosecution and people who believe that Rick is guilty. They'd say, well, if it's a single sector though, like you're not going to get that data. But as I've suggested, you're still going to get meaningful data. So, of course, Holeman's words don't make sense. And I mean, that's not a surprise. We know that Holeman believes that the young bridge guy and old bridge guy sketches look the same. So, interesting, isn't it, really? His perception is clearly quite different to the majority of us. Yeah, and I don't think this is the case of the double empathy problem. Or maybe it is, actually, because I cannot understand how his mind works. So I suppose. Yeah, so he speaks as though there's this single circular geofence covering both the High Bridge and Rick's home, and that's too broad to be useful. But true geofence data gives GPS level coordinates within meters. And we see that again on the knowledge C data. You can see for Libby's coordinates that are given, they say within 5 meters, within 30 meters. It's not this broad range like McClellan says. Cell tower data gives sector direction and timing and advanced estimates. So it's a little bit less accurate in terms of range, but it can still give us information. Neither one naturally produces a vague circle that includes both areas. So his explanation only makes sense if investigators never analysed tower sectors, never completed stage 3 Google data, but that would be ridiculous if they didn't do at least some of that. Now, you notice though as well, go back to what his actual words are, he loves to say things, and I've seen this before, I think I've seen it with regards to the Hoosier Harvest Store footage, like he finds ways to kind of insulate himself, I suppose, from the mistruths that we hear. So he says things like, I don't know the time. I don't want to give you inaccurate information. Yeah, well, go back to the source and find the accurate information then, right? Like, ridiculous again. Anyway, I get really worked up about this stuff, and I know we all do. It's just so crazy. Bye, Pie Crust. Thank you for joining and coming in. See you soon. So I've got a little bit more info about cast as well, because we know cast analysis was done, and this provides even more data about people's movements. And again, I'm not going to go reading through this. I'll leave the screen, the slide up for you guys to read, because otherwise it's just me reading out information that I got from, reviewing the manual and from AI essentially. But there's so much more information that could be accessed when they use cast analysis. So there's no way that there couldn't have been useful information. So the technology was there, the analysis wasn't. So with Rick's Mead hacks on record, investigators could have filtered every tower log to reconstruct exactly, I think that's maybe overselling it, maybe not exactly, but a pretty good picture of when and where his phone connected. Even if his home and trails shared one tower, casts could distinguish direction, distance, usage patterns. And yet, 6 years later, the lead investigator described the data as not overly helpful. However, he previously said that on the first page that the data did help in the investigation. But how? Because you've never been able to find or connect anyone digitally to this crime. So, I mean, yes, we can take the perspective that he just doesn't know what he's talking about. And I do believe that's part of the problem here. I think this stuff is obviously complicated, and I'm not suggesting that a lot of us would know that. However, he's a lead investigator in a double homicide of 2 young girls. Shouldn't he know that? I mean, I was surprised that the lawyers didn't know that. But again, they can't be experts in everything, and their job isn't to be the investigators. It's the legal aspect. But surely the lead investigator, lieutenant, who gets awards apparently, should know this stuff, right? So it's not a limitation of the science, though. It's basically a breakdown of how the science is applied. There is absolutely ways that data could have been used helpfully in this case. Now, it's not too late. It's not too late. I'm going to go back to this slide, which is from the past presentation, and it's not too late. They can check the discovery again and see if there is any 2017 geofencing data. I suspect there is. They can check the tower dump data, which we know exists, and search for Rick's Mead hacks to find pings and analyze behavior of the phone that day. They can check the 2019 geofence data, stage 1, even if there's only stage 1, and track devices pinging in and around the trails during that key window and check against known witness statements. They'd be able to identify, there's not that many people on the trails within that key window. So they'd probably be able to identify from witness statements who's who, even without de-anonymizing the data. They can compare the geofencing pings and the tower dump pings for Rick particularly. They can check with Google whether law enforcement requested earlier geofencing data, and they could subpoena FBI data if they're concerned they've not got the full picture. So it's definitely not too late. It could still be super useful gosh, I would volunteer my time to go through that to look for this. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but we'd figure it out. I would volunteer my time to do this because I think it's just gold and I think it's so important. So, I mean, long story short, Holeman's deposition, his comments around geofencing are absurd. He clearly is either not understanding it and or is muddying the waters with it. I'm disappointed that they weren't pressed further on this for all of those months before trial because it just doesn't feel good enough. But yeah, it's not too late. It is not too late. So if we understand geofencing and tower dumps, what Holeman is saying does not make sense. And that's the key message from today. Not a lot more than that. It's just to reiterate what that data actually can show and most likely does show, and that there's something really fishy going on here. There was an absolute push to make sure that data was suppressed based on flawed reasoning. McClellan saying it's not a good science. Gosh, because like toolmark analysis when you're comparing a spent and unspent round is like, it's just they really didn't want it in. And I think that's because potentially if you uncover it and you look deep into it, that it does have exculpatory information. And the other fishy thing here, I've always said, is Rick's phone being missing. And I don't believe that's fishy on the part of Rick. That phone could have provided information that provided so much more detail. And I actually think that detail would have been exculpatory. And so it's a little interesting that they searched his house the very same day they interviewed him, didn't allow him a chance to find that phone, but the phone was missing. I mean, I don't know, come to your own conclusions with that. I won't outright suggest foul play, but it doesn't seem right, does it? Now, I'm going to come back to the chat. I've just ranted for half an hour. And I really appreciate all the people coming in. Like, I really do. I know for my channel, I don't get hundreds of viewers, but for me, anything over 10, and I'm like, wow, I remember the days when I was in here and it was like one person talking to me. So thank you so much for joining and engaging. I could see the chat moving as I was talking. Spooky just needs to say woo, 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 if you can hear him in the background. Yeah, I will go back and read all the chat comments. I won't do it right now on screen because otherwise that would be a little bit boring. Add more stuff. I want to come back and do some more. Okay, guys, you don't need to watch the end of that video. So, guys, I guess the thing is that I've seen a lot of comments in the chat about other aspects of why you might think Rick is guilty. And, I have always been super open-minded, but I do not agree that common sense wins. Common sense is often incorrect. That's the problem here. If we relied upon common sense, we would rely upon the earth being flat. We've talked about this in the past. Unfortunately, the sort of folk concepts that we have about individuals and things like that are not usually as accurate, and they're never as accurate as science. And psychology is not a soft science. Psychology is based on evidence and statistics. And when I provide you with the chances of somebody like Rick having committed the crime, I'm not basing it on intuition. I'm basing it on the fact that we now have centuries of data about crime, and there is no case of someone with no indications of any leakage. There is no way that we can jump to assumptions based on what we think is right. I don't think. So I'm going to keep going back to that, guys. I know I might sound like a broken record, but whenever I talk about things, I try to always make sure that I engage with it from a evidence-based perspective. And when I'm speculating based on my own thoughts, I'll always mention that. false confessions occur in such in a significant proportion of cases. It's not unheard of for there to be false confessions. It's not unheard of for an innocent person to say they committed a crime. I think that it's super, super important not to make assumptions without consulting what past cases have shown us. And that's why I'll continue to do that. So, yeah, sorry, but I'm going to disagree too. I'm with you, Dee. I'm going to disagree with the people who are suggesting that it's really obvious and that, that we can just look at a picture and indicate that that's Bridge Guy, because a whole town of Delphi did not think that the guy that worked at the pharmacy was Bridge Guy. So we can see what we want to see after the fact. And yeah, I'm with you, Carla, and zero evidence. I think the really important thing to ask yourself is, if this were your brother, father, somebody in your family, or yourself, would you want people to convict you based on the fact that you might look a little bit like a blurry pixelated image, or based on the fact that you could be the one outlier in, centuries of documented crime? So, I think majority of us don't want that. I wouldn't want that. So I can't wait till one day when I do hope that the real reason that Rick was cleared comes out. And I think we're getting closer to it. So the people who believe that Rick is an innocent man, I'm not going to give up, because I know there is a reason that Rick was not a suspect in this case. And yeah, I can't wait till we can prove that once and for all. We don't need to prove who it was. Ideally, I'd love to be able to do that, because I think it would be wonderful for us to be able to have true justice for Abby and Libby. But I can tell you that Abby and Libby, they would not want an innocent man locked up and tortured for the rest of his life for a crime he didn't commit. So it has become a bit strange, Dee. I agree with you. I understand people are passionate and they have their own ideas here, but I think we've got to be so, so careful not to jump to conclusions using common sense. And I keep saying this, guys, common sense is not science. I don't know if you guys can remember back to my video for you, probably quite a few weeks ago now, when I talked about these assumptions that we make, and I asked some funny questions and we relied upon our common sense, and most of us were wrong. Common sense is not an accurate method, and psychology is actually based on statistics. We have to study a hell of a lot of statistics. So, yeah. So I'm not blaming anyone. I don't know who committed the crime. I have my theories, but I wouldn't feel confident enough to say it's obviously someone, because I think that there is a high burden of evidence required to convict someone of such a horrendous crime and have them incarcerated for the rest of their life. So I will continue to advocate for Rick, and I do really think that we're closing in on the truth about what happened in 2017 and why Rick really was deprioritized. And it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. So, okay, guys, I'm going to close it down there. The point of today was to talk about the geofencing, and that Holeman's statement about geofencing does not make sense. And this is just one of many things in this investigation that is not factual and doesn't make sense. So There we go. Oh, hey, Cryptex. Nice to see you. And you know what? Like, it's totally okay for us to have different opinions, but let's definitely not rely on things that are not factual, or just our ideas about what we think happened, based on what we based, because a lot of what we think is based on media, like even, assumptions about how victims behave is based on what we see in movies, not based on the reality of what happens in situations. You know, yeah. Anyway, guys, it's late. It's 11:30, and I need to get these pups to sleep, and they're already sleeping, but they're lounging around next to me. And I need to get some sleep myself. I've got a kids' party tomorrow. But yeah. No, I agree, Cryptex. Witness statements are not media. I'm more talking about when people say, that a man can commit a crime, even though he has no history at all, like a total wolf in sheep's clothing. They just don't really exist. Usually, those wolves in sheep clothing showed some of their wolfy parts. Not usually, they always did. There's always some leakage. And Rick really just has never shown those wolf parts. And if we're going to take him lashing out when he was in a psychotic episode, incarcerated, living in a tiny little hole, then that's not an indicator of deviance. That's an indicator of a traumatic reactive state. So yeah, or at least something to that effect. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish up because it's been a long stream, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Bye-bye.